Good morning, everyone. Have you ever wondered how the cybersecurity works for your credit card? Stick around. Your business will benefit from this conversation. I'll be right back.
People think that this is the way things are working. So employees, team members, managers, leaders, but in actuality, there's a massive gap between what you think you're delivering and the experience that your customers are actually having on the front line.
Launching an online business needs a little bit of a mindset change. It's not just purchasing the website or the system and then sales come through automatically. There needs to be a little bit of a groundwork.
I mean, we are talking about going after the customer. This seems so obvious, but it's not, because when you are talking in a digital world, this customer now is much more empowered. It's much more criterious. It's much more looking for real relevancy on the way that he's connecting with any engagement, any company, any product, or any offer.
Good morning and welcome to First Atlantic Commerce. Here on the FAC Live Show, we cover all things e-commerce in the Caribbean. Our guests join us from all over the Caribbean and generously share their expertise, knowledge, and insight into the digital world and how we operate within it. If you're joining us from LinkedIn or Facebook, thank you. Don't forget to like and follow our page to continue seeing content that will help you grow your business online. Today, we have the privilege to talk to Ronald Viera, aka Ronnie. He is the Chief Operating Officer of First Atlantic Commerce and has over 40 years in the IT industry. In addition to his IT background, Ronnie has attained the most recognized cybersecurity certifications, which are so many acronyms. It's better off if you go check it out on his LinkedIn profile. He is currently the chair of the Bermuda Government Cybersecurity. Oh, you see, look, acronyms messing up my tongue already. Governance board. He's also an avid cyclist, which he seemed to deny because he's riding every Sunday. We have a lot to talk about when it comes to that. And today we are talking about what is PCI compliance and why you need it in the Caribbean. As always, I'm joined by Chris Burns, the CEO of First Atlantic Commerce, here to help connect the dots with the technical side of e-commerce. Hey, Chris, how is it in Bermuda?
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everybody. It is good in Bermuda. We have officially reached summer, so it's about 1,000% humidity for the next 5 months. So it's one of those things where you wait for it and you wish for it, and when it gets here, you kind of wish it was kind of winter again. But it is, Bermuda is in a good spot right now. We're pretty much fully open again. Airport is open. Tourists are coming in. People are allowed to get together and see each other again. So yeah, it's feeling like a good place to be right now. And I just counting down the days till I can actually leave after 18 months.
I think that is a lot of us. And for those who don't know, Ronnie's also in Bermuda. And I want to know, do you guys do the whole summer vacation? Do you say that? Because technically, isn't Bermuda always summer? Ronnie, speak on behalf of your people.
Well, yeah, it is. The weather is great most of the time, but we do have a change in seasons, unlike some of the islands to the south of us. So we do have, we call it winter. The North Americans wouldn't call it winter here, but it's and we have some really nice weather sometimes in our winter time, but it's windy and rainy during the early months of the year. But as of May, the weather improves greatly. And as Chris said, right now, July, August, bit humid, but still great weather nonetheless. So great place to live.
Well, awesome. I think that we have definitely covered the English side of this interview because we just spoke about the weather. So let's So let's shift over to why we are really here. And spoiler alert, guys, I know as much about PCI as you, so I'm going to be asking a lot of questions on your behalf. However, please feel free to head over to the comments because I will definitely ask the questions for you. So let's start with basics. What is PCI? Because we have a lot of companies exploring e-commerce for the first time. You have Trinidad and Tobago still under state of emergency, but the borders are going to open next week, and the conversation around e-commerce has heightened for obvious reasons. But PCI just seems to be something that nobody not necessarily speaks about. So for those who don't understand or know what it is, can we start with what it is?
Sure. So I'll cover off what the acronym stands for first, and then I want to explain the basic payment flow of an e-commerce transaction. So the acronym stands for Payment Card Industry, and then you have to attach DSS to that, which is Data Security Standards. So at a high level, PCI is administered by an organization called the PCI Council, which is made up of the card associations, the Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Amex, etc. They set the rules for the card industry. It's identified as self-regulation as opposed to government regulation. So with that being said, first of all, I should just cover off the payment flow before I go into sort of how PCI works. So in an e-commerce world, the card holder and the card, for that matter, are considered not present, i.e. the website or the merchant cannot see the card holder and cannot see the card. So it's considered a card not present transaction, e-commerce. So one of the key things there, of course, is verifying that the person using the card has authority to use the card. So that's one of the challenges in e-commerce. However, the payment flow, as it stands, obviously the merchant puts up a website, a web store, and you can fill up a shopping cart. When you get to the shopping cart, you're finished, you want to do checkout, so you check out. The next step in that process is obviously you have to pay for the goods. And because we're talking today about PCI, we're talking about paying for the goods using a credit or non-PIN-based debit card. So what happens then is the merchant has to present a page which allows you to enter those card details. So card details are the card number, the expiry date, the cardholder name, some perhaps the address data, and then the CVV code, which is a 3-digit code on the back of the card, the physical card. Now, the idea of the CVV code is that in order to have that number, you have to have the physical card because it's not a number which should be written down or stored anywhere in a merchant website. So that is considered sensitive data, sensitive card data. PCI, as I mentioned earlier, is only concerned about the security of that card data. That's the primary concern. Once the data is entered, in our case, for the gateway, the transaction is sent to us, our system for processing, and then we send back a response. So that is essentially the basic payment transaction flow. So before I go on, do you have any questions? Just to clarify there.
Well, for just to step back a bit, because I think one of the parallels to this would be like the ISO. I don't know if you know about the ISO, where there's an international standard organization for certain products and services. So when we talk about the PSI, we're talking about a standardization of the card industry.
Yeah. So PCI, it's called the PCI Council, and as I said earlier, it's made up of the members are the card associations, right? The Visa, MasterCard. So they have set the rules for how card data should be handled and how it should be secured. What security controls should be around that card data.
Okay, great. And I'm gonna shift across to Chris for a second, because you as people explore e-commerce and the solutions are out there, a lot of the times you don't necessarily look for things like the PCI. So when it comes to a business owner trying to navigate the e-commerce space, what
Yeah.
advice would you give to that small business owner in this PCI space, and what should they look for?
So I think what you're looking for there is you knowing the term. So and there's different ways that you can mitigate your scope or what you're liable for in terms of PCI coverage. So there are ultimately the card associations will hold the banks accountable for the merchant's PCI status, but the merchant should always have that in mind. So, it's one of these things where they say sort of ignorance is no defense, really. Sort of, in terms of, if, well, I didn't know anything about PCI. And I said, well, that's unfortunate because if as soon as you put up an online business, you come under PCI scope. So, it's like saying I didn't know what the speed limit was. When you're driving down the car, you're driving down the motorway at 150 miles an hour, and the speed limit 70. So you need to be aware of those terms, and again, you're going to look at getting that information from companies like ours or from your bank, because when you apply for your e-commerce merchant account, the bank is going to ask you to fill out a PCI questionnaire, like a self-assessment questionnaire, and it's going to ask you, and Ronnie can tell you a lot more about this in detail, but it's going to ask you lots of information about how you run your online business, how do you process credit cards, do you store credit cards, what sort of security do you have around your web server, that sort of thing. And you need to gather all that information. So it's again, like when you're, I would associate it to a little bit if you had a food manufacturing plant, there's lots of health and safety regulations that you have to adhere to be able to produce that food in that plant. And PCI is the same kind of overview, but for credit card payments, effectively.
I love that analogy with the seatbelt, because I too fell into the trap. I was using PayPal and somebody asked for a refund. And it was interesting because, luckily I had a sign off and so forth. But you don't actually think about those things when you're transitioning offline to online. And that's such an important fact that business owners need to evolve in that space. And I feel like I am privy to a masterclass right now. So I'm pretty excited in the lamest way possible. When it comes to the conversation around self-assessment as a business owner, Ronnie, can you share some insight on this questionnaire? Because I feel overwhelmed just by the idea, because you have so many forms to fill out with banks and so forth, but I can see why it's important. So just could you shed some light on that for folks out there?
Yeah, so Chris alluded to some of what I'm about to explain as well. So the key factor here is, where is the card data entered and captured? Where is it being stored? Where is the card data being transferred to? And how is it secured at all times? So what are the security controls around card data at all points of the process? So this is important because when a merchant wants to start out in the e-commerce world and take cards for payment, they can either have the website, the form on their website, running on their server for the cardholder to enter the data, right? They can do that. There's nothing stopping them from doing that. But however, what that means is that they have a much higher degree of responsibility for securing that card data, because they're going to be stored in their environment. The other way to do it is to outsource or use a service that we have, which when they reach that process in the payment flow, they would have, and without getting too technical here, they would have the cardholder complete the card data on our server. And again, there's a lot of technical stuff behind that. But the whole point here is that the merchant needs to understand what PCI is, as Chris alluded to, But the key is, where is the cardholder being managed? Where's the cardholder data being managed? So that's sort of an important point before they start doing their e-commerce and building their website. Most of the shopping cart applications, particularly the ones that use our service, in most cases they will use our hosted payment page, which is where the cardholder would enter the card data. It's on our server. Therefore, the merchant's PCI risks are a lot lower. So when it comes to the self-assessment questionnaire that Chris also mentioned, some banks have their own version of the self-assessment questionnaire. However, the PCI Council also has them as well. So if the cardholder is entering card data on our server, then the questionnaire that the merchant would have to complete for the bank is a lot lighter in terms of questions and information they have to provide. If the merchant decided to capture that data on their server, then they're going to have to complete a lot more detailed questionnaire. Sorry, I feel I'm getting a little deep right now, so let me know if I find anything there.
Well, thanks for the self-monitoring on that one. That conversation around data, I feel very passionate about it, because we don't respect people's email addresses, let alone credit card information, which is something we definitely have to delve into. We also have a question from Dominique, where we will, that's a really good question. We're going to cover that, but we're just going to go on a quick break and we'll be right back. And welcome back to the FAC Live Show. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we usually cover all things e-commerce with guests joining us from different islands, sharing their knowledge on the digital world that we are all part of. You're not going to find these conversations anywhere else. I guarantee you it. So make sure to like and follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn so you don't miss a single live show. Be sure to comment with any questions and we will try our best to answer them today. And we usually slide into comments even after the show. As always, I'm joined by Chris Burns, the CEO of First Atlantic Commerce, here to help connect the dots with the technical side of e-commerce. Hey, Chris. And we also have, we're sort of in the FAC space today. We have Ronnie Viera. He is the Chief Operating Officer at First Atlantic Commerce and has over 40 years of experience within the IT industry, which we happily tap into today. Let us return to this question from Dominique. Would a small business owner need to be PCI compliant before applying for payment gateways such as FAC? And if so, how does one apply to become PCI compliant? Who wants to tackle that?
I can take that one. So the first thing to say is that every merchant who's accepting card data has to be quote unquote PCI compliant. However, in order to demonstrate compliance, it goes back to what Chris mentioned earlier, the self-assessment questionnaire, or whatever questionnaire your bank has given you to complete. So what happens when you complete that questionnaire? You're answering questions where the bank is trying to determine how you're handling the card data. When they get that questionnaire, when you return it, they're doing a risk assessment based on the information you provided. Now, I don't know that the banks come back and give you a certificate. I don't think they do, to say that, hey, you're PCI compliant. I think what they will do is just simply, they will ask any questions if they have any based on how you're handling the card data. But they will determine based on your responses whether you are in compliance with the PCI requirements. So that is sort of PCI compliance. There is another level of compliance, if I can call it that, but it's actually certification. So in our case, and so we are a payment service provider. and also large merchants, very large merchants have to do this. We have to have a PCI audit annually, and that includes a whole load of other stuff, pen testing and all of that. It's another degree of determining how well we are securing the card data.
Great. So, Chris, you wanted to add anything to that question?
Yeah, I think, Ronnie made the important distinction between compliance and certified, right? So, merchants, as you said, don't have to get certified unless they are very large merchants, maybe like a Walmart, for example, or an Amazon. And, from our perspective, actually more from a merchant perspective, when they are looking at signing up with a payment gateway, they should, ask the questions, are they PCI certified? Because there, have been ones out there that, they say they're compliant rather than certified. And if you're still not comfortable with that, you can ask to see their, what's called an AOC. And they should be able to provide you that. And that's what we get every year once we pass our PCI DSS certification. And then, if you are using, let's say if you're a gym and you're using a membership system, for example, and they are storing your card data on behalf of your organization, those organizations, they should be certified as well, right? So if anybody is taking that storage on for you, you want to make sure that you're asking the right questions in terms of, are they certified or compliant? But yeah, as Ronnie mentioned, every merchant has to be compliant. It's a bit of a minefield. The self-assessment questionnaires are, and they vary. There's lots of different ones as well. Like there's an A, C, D, A1, and it just depends on how much card data you're actually dealing with. And if you're using, as what Ronnie mentioned before, whether you're using, a direct connection into our gateway from a payment page that's on your own servers versus a hosted payment page, which is held on our servers. So your scope in terms of PCI is reduced if you use our hosted payment page, for example, because all the card data is being entered on our servers rather than on the merchant servers. So there's different ways you can continue to reduce your overall scope from a PCI compliance perspective.
So I want to plead the most ignorant in this room right now, and that's okay because that's what I'm here for. And I want to ask because I want to put it in the context of what's happening right now. You have a lot of businesses that would say, WhatsApp me. I have this product, you want to buy it, WhatsApp me. And you will have a lot of people having a lot of this information on their phones. In addition to that, people would have Excel spreadsheets with information. Now, there are a lot of layers as to why that is wrong, but I want you to share what is considered sensitive data, because it's more than just a shift in the information, it's a shift in culture. So who wants to tackle that very loaded question?
Well, I think Ronnie probably should, but I think he's just broken out into a cold sweat when you said that there was in Excel spreadsheets and people's WhatsApp as well. But yeah, I think Ronnie is more than qualified to answer that.
Yeah, so sensitive data is well, as I mentioned earlier, in the card world, it would be the full card number, the CVV, which is digits on the back of the card, the expiry date to some extent, and then perhaps some of the address data. It depends. The issue becomes even more sensitive if all of that data is in the same place, right, and available to someone, right? So everybody knows my name, so knowing my name is irrelevant to card security unless you have all of the other data associated with my card, right? So that's in the card world. However, it's a very good question that you asked, because we've been talking about PCI. Other sensitive data, which sensitive personal data, would be date of birth for sure, social security numbers, any type of unique identifier, such as that employee number, those types of things. In a privacy world, so this is where there's lots of privacy legislation in the world right now, and it's growing. So, for instance, Bermuda has privacy legislation. It's not currently enforced, but there is a privacy commissioner, and he's working on guidelines. The most significant piece of privacy legislation is GDPR, and that's European privacy legislation. So one might think we're in the Caribbean, we don't have to worry about GDPR. Well, we do, because particularly in the card world, for instance. So you might be selling widgets from Jamaica, but if somebody in Europe, a European cardholder, buys these widgets from you and they give you their card data, by default, you are now a part of potentially the GDPR world. If your server is hacked and somebody gets 500,000 excessive numbers used, just for example, card numbers that are European card numbers, you might find yourself in trouble with the GDPR, and they will work through your own data protection people in your country, regulator in your island, for instance. That's in theory how it's supposed to work. GDPR is still relatively new, so they're working through these things. But anyway, to summarize my point here, there are other privacy regimes, particularly legislation that one wants to be careful with, because if you do lose card data, it's not just the PCI and the banks that you have to worry about. It's then your own privacy regulator in your own country, which might levy fines for loss of that data.
I like what you brought up with the GDPR, because I was actually having a meeting with my team yesterday, and we were talking about a very large business that every time you unsubscribe to their email newsletter, they kept re-adding you. And it's definitely, to me, a break of agreement that you would have made sign up initially. But what would you say to the person who argues, well, my business is not outside the Caribbean, so that doesn't affect me?
Well, I mean, when it comes to card data, it doesn't matter where you are. They are going to, if you have a breach in your system and you have a bunch of card numbers stored in there, it doesn't matter what part of the world you are going to get fined. So it's on the privacy side, it's a little bit different, but when it comes to card data, the rule of thumb is just don't store it, right? And that's really what you should never really be storing card data. You should offload that onto somebody like us, that is going to, that is PCI certified, PCI DSS certified, to be able to store card data. And then there's different levels of that DSS that you go through depending on how much card data you process within there. So, the levels of security that we have to go through to be able to pass that certification and to deal with those card numbers is very, very significant. But, and you still see it, you fill in a form and they ask you to put your credit card number on it, so they can bill you later. And it's not online technically. But it might be in somebody's drawer, but if somebody breaks into their offices or whatever it is and grabs all those forms, that's the same as an online breach effectively. So I will never, obviously, being in the business, I will never write down my card number on anything. But and people understand different levels of that, I found. So we have one country, we had a large client that had a call center for payment. And people would give their names, their date of birth, where they lived, their mother's maiden name, their card number, and the expiry, but they would not give their CVV because they felt that was a step too far, which is crazy to me. I mean, you've literally just given everything pretty much apart from the CVV to somebody to social engineer if they really wanted to, to do that. So, the perception changes on a global basis, but if you have a breach, doesn't matter where you are in the world, you are going to get fined.
I just have memories of the requirements of entering all our information for tracing purposes, and I refuse to put my address. I refuse to put my number. It's it's so interesting because data is treated differently in the Caribbean. And I think that's something we need to expand a little bit more on. And this idea of where that information is going is also very interesting. I have a question from Rohan, but we're going to come right back because we're going to go on a little break and ask your question afterwards about compliance when you have store parts of the card information. I don't know how. Okay, so basically for merchants that store parts of the card information on their cash register system, do they need to be PCI compliant? Just hold that thought. We're going to answer it on our way back. So see you in a bit. Welcome back. Good morning or good afternoon or good night, depending if you're watching this on a replay. Thank you so much for joining us. FAC Live covers all things e-commerce with guests joining us from different islands, sharing their knowledge on this digital world that we've all been a part of. You're not going to find these conversations anywhere else. This is more of a masterclass, to be honest. So make sure to like and follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook so you don't miss a single live show. Be sure to comment if you have any questions, and we will try our best today to answer them. As always, I'm joined by Chris Burns, the CEO of First Atlantic Commerce, as well as today our guest is Ronnie. He is the Chief Operating Officer at First Atlantic Commerce and has over 40 years of IT experience that we're going to tap in today. And it's been a very robust conversation. We're trying our best to balance the technicality and the acronyms of the world in e-commerce, especially for PCI compliance. We're going to hit straight to this question from Rohan. I'm going to ask it again. For merchants that store parts of the card information, last 4 digits and expiry date on their cash registry systems, do they need to be PCI compliant?
So again, back to what I said earlier, everyone has to be PCI compliant. Everybody has to comply with the rules of the PCI DSS requirements. However, to answer that specific question, storing the last 4 digits and the expiry date is perfectly PCI compliant. There is no way for anyone to figure out the first 12 digits. It's a 16-digit card number, and the expiry
Ronnie,
date is useless.
Sorry to pause
the
you.
Full card number.
You went blank for a second. So the most important point you said, it just disappeared. So you can repeat that.
Okay, I apologize. What I'm saying was everyone has to be PCI compliant. However, it is perfectly compliant to store the last 4 digits of the card and the expiry date. It's impossible to get the first 12 of the card number, and you need all 16. And the expiry date is a useless piece of information without the full card number. So that is perfectly being PCI compliant.
Okay, great. And Chris, you have anything to add to the question?
No, I think Ronnie answered that perfectly, actually.
Okay, so we're going on to spiral into a conversation around privacy and data policies here by Dominique. But before we get into that, I want to ask about the process, right? Because a lot of us are consumers, and Amazon Prime Day just left us, and I can assure you, I've seen a lot of tweets, people complaining, waiting for their items to clear on Twitter. So a lot of us understand that we give our information, and especially with a robust site like Amazon, where you literally don't have to enter your credit card information all the time. My question to you guys would be, where is my info going? So I'm putting in that credit card information and it's being stored somewhere. Where is it?
Well, I think it depends on the merchant. So Amazon will most likely be storing that themselves through their own sort of gateway system. And obviously they have a very robust IT infrastructure, right? They're nearly $400 billion a year in sales. They are spending their IT budgets are astronomical, and but if they're using our service, for example, so we have what we call a tokenization service. If somebody is having repeat customers, and they want to create that sort of Amazon type of experience where once you register on the website, it will ask you to store what they call a card on file, and if you choose to do that, you'll enter your card data in, and then when you make your first purchase, it's going to send that data encrypted to us, as a trying to do the transaction, but also do a tokenization request. And so we'll take that card number, and then we'll encrypt it, but also assign a unique token to it. So it's just a value, effectively, that we can send back with the transaction response. So the merchant can take that token and store the token against that user's profile in their system. So Pauline's profile has this token attached to it. So when you come back and you want to, say, top up your phone on Flow, for example, they will send us the amount and the token, and then we will take that token, detokenize the value to get the original card number, and then send it out for processing, and then send the response back. But at that point, after the initial tokenization request, the merchant's not really dealing with any card data. So it's a much more secure way to create that experience, to create that user experience, firstly, where you can get all those impulse purchases and really easy, nice, especially if you have a mobile component to it as well, where you don't want people sort of fat thumbing their card numbers into the app and getting it wrong, and all that just creates a bad experience, right? But importantly, secondly, you're creating a much more secure environment for your business because you're not storing any card numbers.
That's so interesting, the tokenization conversation, because it really is the equivalent of, you bought this, people who bought this also bought this. So it gives you this desire to purchase things. Need is a special word, but we feel like we need it when that actual service is there. So it's very interesting for entrepreneurs to understand how this technology works, because then the bottom line is going to help their sales. And if you are just joining us, we're here talking about PCI, which is Payment Card Industry Compliance Conversation. And if you are new to e-commerce, this may seem a bit overwhelming, but not to worry. We're trying to break it down as clearly to you as possible. Don't forget to slide into the comments if you have any questions. And earlier, Ronnie was discussing the compliance and certification. So there's this thing called PCI DSS. Can you explain to us, Ronnie? I know you may have done that before, but just reiterate what that is.
Yeah, so I'll just explain the acronym. It's a Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards. So it is administered by the PCI Council, which is made up of the major card associations, so Visa, MasterCard, Amex, Discover, etc. So they have outlined prescribed 12 areas of security controls that must be in an environment where card data is being stored. And that's what any self-assessment questionnaires or certification audits like ourselves, the 12 areas or 12 areas of requirements are applied to determine how compliant one is. And an audit will use that process.
Okay. I can imagine entrepreneurs watching this and business owners who are, evolving, going, oh my gosh, there's so much to do. I now not just have to get, because, a merchant account for point of sale is different from a merchant account for e-commerce. And then on top of that, you have to hire new staff in spaces that you are not familiar with. And then now you're telling me I have to fill out this PCI DSS self-assessment questionnaire, and I have to complete all of these things. Chris, what are you going to tell that entrepreneur when they're like, I'm overwhelmed, or what am I to do?
So it can feel overwhelming. I get that, and it's really it's about talking to the right people, and we can help with all of that. This is not just an infomercial for us, but if you come to a payment gateway like FAC for the region, we know all the banks, we know all their processes, we know all the forms that need to be filled in. We can help answer the questions in terms of the PCI, because we do get that a lot. And the banks may have their own sort of security assessment forms. And there's some aspects of the technical part of it that the merchants will need help filling in, and that's what we're here to do, for sure. And even in the point of sale world, you still come under PCI scope, because you're still handling credit cards and credit card data. It might not be to your website, but if you have one of those terminals, you are technically handling credit cards and credit card data within there. So just because you're moving to the online world doesn't mean you're suddenly hit with PCI. You have it from a point of sale perspective as well. And there's different ways the point of sale world deals with PCI compliance as well. There's different levels of encryption keys you can have injected into the terminals that reduce your PCI scope. And we're not going to go down that rabbit hole now, but there is, but you're not escaping from it. So yeah, I think, but ultimately, it's like any business. Just because it's online doesn't mean it's a flick of a switch and you're suddenly online. It's the same as you're opening a brick and mortar store. There's lots of different levels that you have to go through to make sure that you're going to open your business properly. And e-commerce is the same way. But by talking to trusted, experienced companies within the space, they can take a lot of that headache away from you.
And as an entrepreneur,
and I think just to mention also, sorry, I apologize. Sorry. The other thing is, I mentioned this earlier. The key question for a business owner to ask their technology provider, so whether it obviously we store card data, I'm talking about whoever develops the website, for instance, or the shopping cart product they're going to use. The key question to ask is, where is the card data being handled, stored, transmitted, etc.? Because that is going to determine the PCI compliance scope. And so whilst it is a bit overwhelming, it really is a simple question at the start of the process, because if you're using a piece of shopping cart software that uses a hosted page, so they do not process the card data at all, that's going to make life a lot easier for you all the way through the process. It's not going to solve all the other business problems for you, but when it relates to card data, it will take that one off your list.
And I think that is a good point. That is going to, there was a question here, well, not a question, but an observation, because the difficulty lies really in the culture, because it's a change. And I'm going to read Dominique's comment here, and you guys can add to the mix. So what he's mentioned is we need to talk about documenting privacy and data policies on e-commerce sites within the Caribbean. Persons should know exactly how their data, card and personal, is handled by a website. And I see a lot of this. Right now we have people gathering information. Some people may think it's simple information, email addresses and names and stuff, and there's no privacy policy. Within the digital marketing space, you're now having a lot of platforms forcing companies to ensure that there's a link. Actually, within LinkedIn, you can't run a lead generation campaign without a privacy policy website to showcase where the data is going to be. So from the e-commerce space, how do they ensure that this sort of information is relayed to the consumer?
Well, it's very much in terms of the privacy policies and terms and services on the website. So on the card associations publish a list of best practices in terms of what you should have on your website, like your terms and conditions, your refund policies, your privacy policies, sections, make sure that you display the card logos properly, having the HTTPS with the little padlock on the top, SSL certificates. So there's a whole list that we actually, check on our merchants' websites based on that list, that they have those things in place before you do it. But, but it's tricky because, people don't read terms of service or refund policies. You just, you click the box, it's an opt-in, and that's the other thing. Everything should be opt-in, right? Not automatically filled. But you have that and it go through, but nobody reads them. And it's even the thing with with iOS, the latest iOS update. So you have this scenario now where the apps are now asking you if they are allowed to track your data and what other apps you use and what data you're using in those apps. Whereas before, everybody, and I'm guilty of that as well. You click on the terms and conditions. I didn't really understand that, but in that terms and conditions, I was giving that app full access to track what I was doing on all the other apps on my phone. And that is scary. And that's why things like GDPR are existing now. It sounds quite heavy-handed, but there has just been a huge abuse of people's data over the years. And it will be interesting to see, if we get to a point where we are permissioning our data to be sold to the highest bidder at some point. And there are companies that have started to do that, where you can literally sell your data to companies if you choose, because at the moment it's being sold on your behalf and you have nothing to do with it.
And from a policy perspective, at the risk of being a little political, because you have the knowledge, Ronnie, I want to ask about where you see the future of it, because in Trinidad we don't have those laws in place yet. It is being in this discussion. I know Jamaica is discussing it as well. I think Barbados started something. Do you have any predictions within the Caribbean when it comes to the policies and protecting data?
I'm sorry.
Do you hear me?
Did you repeat? Sorry. I hear you. Can you repeat the question? Sorry about that.
So I was asking about your view, maybe being a futurist in terms of where we're going with treating policies, because with the EU, with GDPR, you have legal legislation in place for the data. But in the Caribbean, it's not so much. Do you think that eventually we're going to get there?
Yeah, I definitely think we're going to get there, because it's going to become more problematic to do business in the European Union if you do not have privacy legislation in country. Now, yeah, of course, there are merchants that are in Bermuda, for that matter, or Jamaica or any island that don't deal with anybody outside of their country. But I think the privacy movement, if I can call it that, is definitely progressing. And I do believe we are going to have a lot more privacy legislation in place. I mean, Bermuda's a little bit behind. We've had legislation enacted in 2016, but it's still not enforced, and it probably won't be until the end of this year, because they just hired a privacy commissioner last year, etc. So a little bit behind the eight ball there, but we're definitely getting our act together. But again, in Bermuda's context, it's pretty critical that we get this in place, because we do business in Europe, and a lot of companies that are set up here do business with businesses in Europe. So it is very important that we get it in place.
That's an interesting point, because we are in a position of relying on these countries and continents, and in order for us to be compliant, we need to make sure and have those laws. So guys, you heard it here first. Call it an exclusive if you may. This is where we are heading towards. There's no stopping it, and you have to be part of compliance, else you will lose out. So we're going to get a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to share some final thoughts on the PCI space and why your business need to know about this space that we need to be compliant in. Okay? All right, we'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. We're here talking about PCI compliance, and if you don't know what it is, you're gonna have to wait till we stop this, replay it, rewatch it. It's very important in the e-commerce space to understand the acronym PCI and why you need to be compliant. So we've discussed, making sure that you understand the acronyms, making sure that you're compliant. There's also the certification aspect. I know you would have said this before, but just reiterate, Ronnie, in terms of the certification, is it important for a small business to have it?
Yeah. So all businesses except card data need to be making sure that the card data is secure and not accessible by an outside party, etc. So as we've discussed earlier in the conversation, there are ways of reducing your exposure. You can let me continue to lose sleep, and you can store that card data in our environment, and you have a good night's sleep. We offer that service using a hosted payment page. So that is that's sort of the key here, but everybody must be compliant. And then one of the things we haven't talked about already, and perhaps it's one of the questions coming up, but if one loses card data, either from data breach or through an employee stealing the card data, for instance, and selling it somewhere else, it's quite a serious event, and that will bring a lot of pressure to bear from the banks, your acquiring bank. It's just not something not a path you want to go down. And it is, we, as Chris mentioned earlier, we spend a lot of time and a lot of time discussing how we can improve even our own security controls around the card data. It's a constant discussion on our side. So yeah, that is a concern that merchants should have.
That point, go ahead, Chris, you're saying something?
Yeah, I think, and I think there's a divide there, when it comes to privacy policies and people's personal data. You have a range of people, right? You have people that will, I'm not having any voice activated Alexa, Siri, whatever it is in my house or my phone. Everybody's listening to me, they're out to get me and they need my data. And then, and then you have, more moderate views in terms of, you don't want there. And then some people could care less, if somebody's reading their emails or listening to their conversations in their house. So, there's a big divide there. But when it comes to card data, everybody should be concerned about losing card data because there's real world, very immediate repercussions in terms of having that card data stolen. And somebody using it for nefarious purposes, right? So, there's a direct impact from losing that card data. Whether it's, fines from the bank and the card associations through to, reputational risk. If your website is seen as somebody that lost a whole bunch of people's credit card data, the likelihood of them people coming back or new people coming to your site afterwards is hugely reduced. Again, people have sometimes short memories with that. Target obviously had a major breach. Target's still doing quite well. Facebook had a lot of issues with privacy. The stock price went down a little bit after that, bounced right back up to higher than it was before that. And, millions and millions of people still use Facebook. So, I think card data is more severe because, people are going to go, well, I'm just not going to go back to that website again because, that's where my data was stolen if you don't do it properly. And those fines are heavy. They've started, I think, 5,000 and go up significantly from there, depending on what's happened and how many cards are breached. I think Target was fined, multiple millions of dollars for their breach. So yeah, we cannot stress it enough in terms of just do everything you can to make sure you are not storing any card data whatsoever.
Yeah,
And I think it's important to mention too. I know this. Oh, sorry, I apologize. I was thinking it's important to mention too that we've been talking about the security of the card data, which is important, and that's what PCI is all about. I should mention, in case there are some privacy experts on the line here, that privacy legislation encompasses more than just the security of the data, right? You mentioned some of it earlier. It also encompasses the accuracy of the data, being able to have the data removed at your choice. There's a whole bunch of things there that privacy legislation encompasses. It's more than just the security of the data. I should just mention that's the difference between sort of PCI and privacy legislation.
Yeah, the example of Target and Facebook, I know for a fact those are unicorns in a space of Caribbean businesses surviving and adopting to e-commerce space, because a lot of us cannot manage the risk of that. And you have, I mean, obviously a lot of these hackers care about the bigger businesses, but at the same time, you have sites like You've Been Pawned, which is a site you could check and see if, you know, what's on the black market in terms of being hacked. And just from a cybersecurity perspective, because a lot of the times businesses don't place enough effort or money behind that. And I want you to kind of end off the session, Ronnie, with the importance of cybersecurity across your business, because e-commerce is not just about taking a credit card, as you mentioned, and storing the data, but it's basically a business, a digital transformation, if you may, across the business. So in terms of investment, how important is that for cybersecurity?
Yeah, it's so I mean that's a big subject, obviously, probably for another session. However, yeah, there are numerous things that you should do to ensure that your environment is secure. Access control will be sort of one very important, i.e., only allowing access to your environment to those that you've authorized to do so. Then within that, what do they have access to, limiting that? But just bringing it back home, and because as I say, cybersecurity itself is a broad area, right? You're looking at 18 security areas of security controls that you should deploy if you're using NIST, for instance, which is the U.S. national standard. However, the data, if at all possible, and it's not always possible because it depends on your vendor, but if you can secure the data by encryption, that is one of the most important security controls you can employ or deploy. Because if the data is encrypted, then if someone does get access to the data, it will mean nothing to them, provided, of course, that you have secured the keys that were used to encrypt the data, which is another important factor. But I only picked that control out as an important one because, again, all of these controls have to work together, and sometimes somebody can still get through the door, right? But if the data is encrypted, it's still that extra layer of security, which is a multi-layer, I call it. And you'll find that a lot of these data breaches that have happened, very large data breaches in the US, the data actually wasn't encrypted for various reasons. Or they got access to an administrator level access, which passes through the decryption level. But that to me is an important function.
I think that's a great way for us to end today's session. And I think you're definitely right. The cybersecurity conversation is a completely, that requires probably multiple shows, hours on end. Heck, that's a degree right there. All right. So on that note, thank you so much to Chris and Rodney for joining us today. We learned about the importance of being compliant regardless of where your customers reside. Can't stress that enough, guys. It doesn't matter where your business resides, you need to be compliant. Be sure to join us on the 20th of July at the same time, same place, when we have a special edition of the FAC Live Show. Trust me when I say you don't want to miss it. I might bring a glass of wine. Shh, don't tell anybody. As always, be sure to like and follow our page on LinkedIn and Facebook so you don't miss a single live show. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll see you soon. Bye.